Trump government's dismantling of USAID has prompted panic and concern among the aid industry and in some African capitals. A lot is at stake: lives, incomes, and jobs. But Trump says he wants to cut waste and realize more value for American taxpayer dollars. Welcome to African News Debates. My name is Ronald Kato, and on this episode, we ask, USAID shutdown, a wake-up call for Africa or a looming crisis? So it looks like aid cuts won't stop with Trump. As if to compound the misery, the United Kingdom this week announced that it is making significant reductions to its aid budget to focus on defense spending. Now, I'll get to my panel in a minute, but first, here is a report on the consequences the aid cuts are having on refugees in a camp in Kenya.
Widespread demonstrations have rocked security in Kakuma refugee camp in northwestern Kenya on Monday, with police firing live bullets and injuring at least 4 protesters, according to local media. The protests erupted over food and water shortages in the camp. They come as humanitarian aid in Kenya has been reduced following funding cuts from the US Agency for International Development, USAID. The camp, which is one of the largest in the world, is home to around 200,000 refugees and asylum seekers. Since Donald Trump became US president, now Kenyans have shifted all the blame on him. Workers are not getting paid and it's blamed on Trump. No medication in hospital, it's Trump. Now we have to pay for school fees and it's Trump. Everything is Trump. We're tired of Trump. So if Trump can hear us, we're getting humiliated here because of him. So let him stop that and release our things so that we can stop being humiliated. This is for others and oil. This is used. This is the equivalent for 1 month of food when you eat. We don't have other income somewhere. It's only this. Is this enough for you? Imagine if you think that there's not enough, then please help us for this. This condition has affected us for so long. Without alternative sources of funding, there are concerns that the situation in the camp could spiral further out of control.
All right, time now to introduce my panelists. I have Gregory Simpkins. He's an expert on US-Africa relations, worked with USAID, and is the editor of the Habari Network. Gregory, thank you for your time. Good afternoon.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And I have Johanna LeBlanc. Is a national security law and US foreign relations expert. Johanna, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I have from Nairobi, Jeffrey Okoro. He is the executive director of CFK Africa, a non-governmental organization focused on improving public health and prosperity in informal settlements. Good afternoon, Jeffrey.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Rod, for having me.
All right. And from Accra, we're joined by Professor Godfred Bokpin. He's an economist and a professor of finance at the University of Ghana. Good afternoon, Professor, and thank you for your time.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on your show.
Can I start with you, Professor, if I can, briefly? How has the news of the dismantling of USAID been received in Africa?
Well, I think that it has been a shocking development. It looks to me that a lot of African countries didn't anticipate this, or in terms of the suddenness of it and all of that, and therefore we are counting our losses. We didn't have a plan B in place because it was also so sudden. But I think the reason why it has generated a lot of conversation in Africa is because the aid goes to the most vulnerable, which is actually reveals how African leaders have neglected the most vulnerable in our societies, right? So it's a continent of the strong. And therefore, it hasn't been that difficult if African leaders, ministers have to fund their expensive travels to the global north to attend conference, climate conference, whatever. It hasn't been that difficult for African leaders if they have to buy private jets or expensive vehicles for themselves. But when it comes to the most vulnerable in our society, the socially excluded, right, the less to do in our society, because of the upward redistribution of wealth and all of that, we haven't been able to find sufficient space in our budgeting process to accommodate them. And therefore, their livelihood, their sustenance has been outsourced to the donor community. But of course, any serious African leader would have known in the last couple of years that aid reliably has been going down. Okay, others have been cutting down aid on the quiet and all of that. It's just that Trump has elevated it to the front line and it's so sudden and all of that. So I think that it's just a scar on our mind that Africa chose to neglect the most vulnerable in our society. And I think that we should be blaming ourselves more than actually blaming Trump. And of course, we will take it given that it's free money, we don't have to repay, and it goes to the vulnerable. And you see that across Africa, our health systems, the basic needs of our societies have been kept going by the donor community. And to the extent that donor inflows kept coming, African leaders probably take the praise because the cry was silent, right? But now that is no more there, we see the ramifications. We see how critical USAID has become to us. Probably others will even say all this while we have been less appreciative until we lost it. And now the effect is all over the place and all of that. But I think that it will not be, as you rightly indicated, it will not be the US alone. Countries, our traditional donor partners are scaling back. Europe will be scaling back as they look at their own defense and all of that. Even if you look at China, okay, in the last couple of years, in terms of China's development and investment on the continent, it hasn't been like some 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
We shall get to China, Professor, but allow me move to Gregory. Gregory, you worked at USAID as an advisor to the administrator in the Africa Bureau. How would you say, how significant is this moment, the moment of tearing down USAID? How big is it?
Well, just to put it into context, as you pointed out, I did work at AID. I also worked on Capitol Hill, like Joanna. I see three reasons for this driving this fevered pace. First, as soon as President Trump took office, he became a lame duck. That is, he has this term and no more. Prior to other political aspirants starting to make their move and ignoring his directives or contradicting them for their own purposes, Trump wanted to act fast to cut government spending as he promised during the 2024 campaign before the loss of his power happened. Two, Elon Musk found highly questionable USAID spending, for example, to Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan, and the administration acted quickly to shut it down completely as an independent agency because money for what they said were dubious purposes was about to go out the door last month before they shut it down. Third, Trump has long criticized the so-called deep state of bureaucrats who outlast elected officials and do as they wish. Now, bureaucracies operate in this way worldwide. I've seen it in Nigeria and many other countries.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exclusive to the United States. In this cutting exercise, the innocent are being punished along with the guilty, and the speed at which cuts have been made have not taken into account collateral damage or long-term negative consequences. So I just wanted to put that into some context.
Johanna, can we talk about the politics of aid here? I mean, USAID, the US government, has provided billions of dollars in aid. It has sustained lives, it has sustained livelihoods, it has given people jobs. And now, in 2025, it is pulling back, cutting that aid, or remarkably scaling back on what it's been providing. How is the aid world going to look like without the US?
Well, I think first and foremost we have to look at uh, what was the intended purpose of aid to begin with, right? And as we all know, aid is used in a way as a soft power, right, to influence U.S. Policies across the globe, right? Let's be honest. Um, and two, it's also a way for the United States to employ Americans, right? And over the past decade, if not more, there has been a great deal of conversation around the model of aid and how to restructure it and the reforms that need to take place. Because as we know, aid does not necessarily eradicate many of the ills that take place all around the world. In many cases, it simply puts a band-aid on it. Uh, but we have to be realistic about how aid has been provided all across the world. The reality is that for many countries around the world, for every cent, for every dollar, the countries get maybe 10 cents on the dollar, with the rest, with 90 cents coming right back to the United States or Washington, right? So we have to really ask ourselves, if we are to have this aid model, should it be a model that actually, support growth and actually achieve its intended purpose? Should it be merely so you could put a band-aid on the problem? You have issues like malaria, for example. Look how long we've been fighting, to address malaria, right? And yet we have not reached a solution, right? So I think that as countries focus more on their domestic issues because of trade concerns, because of inflation, and because of other concerns, we're certainly going to see less and less of countries providing aid to other nations around the world, even though it serves a significant purpose, in spite of the challenges, right? For nations is to really influence, and it's a form of soft power.
Jeffrey, you work in health and economic prosperity. Tell us, how big is the void there that the withdrawal of US aid is going to create, and how can the Kenyan government, where you are, for example, feel it?
Right. Thank you, Ronald. So I guess I'll start off with the role of aid and the work that we do. So a large part of nonprofit work or development work is focusing a lot on what I would call the gray areas. For instance, we work in slums, in 26 slums across Kenya, and these are usually settlements that lack basic services. And similar, a situation goes to the earlier clip you aired around Kakuma refugee camp, and these are usually areas that really are lacking in what you'd call basic necessities for one to thrive. And so aid organizations and institutions come in to fill that void. And with the current situation, of course, I could just share what we are noting right now is where I am right now, that is in Nairobi and in Kibera slums. We've had 3 hospitals shut down. So if you think about it, what is the effect of 3 health facilities shutting down in a community that is already pressed with lack of amenities? And if you think about the aid cut, that also affected patients initially who were, on ARV drugs and, who are also getting TB medication. The effect of that is, it's not just them. It's a spread to the entire community. And so the effect that we've felt here is massive. Um, and as a country, I think part of the conversation we are having is how can we build a resilient mechanism. I think it's a opportune time for us to be able to craft ways of one, of course, financing ourselves. But reality is, in the short run, people are dying. People are going to die, and so it's not a good situation. And I think we need to find a solution around the current situation that's
Sure.
affecting us.
Professor Bokpin, Jeffrey talks about resilience. And we have had decades of aid given to developing countries by Western nations, and in 2025, our systems, our health systems, our economic systems still get shocked when aid is withdrawn. Can we conclude then that aid cannot build resilience, cannot build sustainability? Professor Bokpin, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Okay, now yes. Go ahead.
Yes, yes, it hasn't been lost on us that Africa could not build a sustainable future on the basis of aid. And also, as the other earlier speakers have indicated, the purpose of aid in itself is not for economic transformation and sustainable growth. That is not the purpose. So let's not expect something from aid that wasn't the express objective of aid in the
What's
first
the
place,
objective?
because if the goal was to develop the continent with aid, probably they would have achieved that long ago. But I think that said, we also acknowledge that in Africa's structural reforms and all that we have gone through in the last couple of years, without the critical role of aid, I think we would have struggled. So many people would have suffered and all of that. So aid has played its part in our development process, but I think that it could not be the panacea. And I'll give you a couple of reasons. If you look at aid and the purpose, and even the aid disbursement and the portion that goes to consultants from the global north, right, from their own countries who have benefited from this aid through consultancy services and all of that, we can say that at the end of the day, they are the net beneficiaries. And others have even said that probably experts in the global north will weep more than the bereaved and all of that. Okay, but the reality is that because this aid over the years have gone to the most vulnerable in our societies, a withdrawal, the impact is quite pervasive along those lines. But of course, if you look at the continent, I can also say that some countries will feel it more than others, right? So if you look at Ethiopia, DRC Congo, Somalia, and the rest of them, they tend to rely more on aid because of the vulnerable in society and all of that. So for us, it's very clear. And I think that it's a wake-up call for Africa. Why is it a wake-up call for Africa? It may be seen as an existential threat, but I see existential opportunity from here. That how do we come together and build resilience by leveraging and benefiting optimally from our natural resources, right? From our natural resources. How do we take advantage of this working with the African Union? We cannot win in silos. We need to come together. We need to have a common strategy so we're able to also negotiate from position of strength from the rest of the world. So for instance, if you look at net outflows or outflows from Africa, illicit financial flows out of Africa, and you compare that to inflows in terms of aid, loans, FDI, and the rest of them, actually, Africa is a net creditor to the rest of the world. Africa is the only continent where all water flows upwards and not downwards. Water flows upwards to the global north, and then the more powerful in the global south, like China and the rest of them. Even if you look at the debt servicing obligation of African countries on euro bonds and the rest, that goes to the same global north and the rest of them. Africa is a net creditor to the rest of the world. Okay, so it's about time that we tighten the loose ends right, deal with corruption. Look, who have been the ultimate beneficiaries of corruption from the continent? It's the same global north. We steal their money and go and put it there and all of that. Look at contracts. Look at, you examine contracts in our natural resource sector and see how Africa loses massively through some of these contracts and all of that. So at the end of the day, if you look at it carefully, I see this as an opportunity, of course, because it's so sudden and we didn't have some kind of a built-in mechanism to ameliorate the effect. We may be weeping now, but I think that, and whether we weep or not, aid will not be there. Aid has been declining. Other countries will follow the US. UK had signaled that. The Germans have also signaled that, because they are going to increase defense spending. And they are not willing to burden their own taxpayers with that cost. Well, they'll look
Thank you very much, Professor. I'm interrupting you to read some feedback from our viewers, feedback that we have received from them. A viewer here said, no crisis, no wake-up call, just accountability. Aid has impoverished Africa. And then Benguni and Profana, you said Africans must stop their stupid wars and focus on building the continent. You said we don't need any more aid in Africa. Aid to Africa means complacent leaders, and complacent leaders leave their country's resources for the West and China to plunder. Strong words there. At one point, less than 30% of funding even made it to ground in Congo. Very little makes it to any hands-free. And I'll end with Gasasi Rajimi, who said, we have enough here to live on our own. It's a quote apparently by President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. Africa can live well without the help of the West. Thank you very much for your feedback. Keep it coming off our social media channels. You can make your thoughts known off our YouTube, on our Twitter and Facebook. Can I come to you, Gregory, now? Working in USAID, you had a front seat presence to some of the private conversations American leaders had with African leaders. What are some of those criticisms, reservations about American aid that African leaders expressed to you that you can tell us about?
Well, I know that in some quarters in the U.S. government, there was frustration that, for example, some of the aid that was offered, was provided, was not used in the way it was intended to be used. The professor is quite right, and as is Joanna, that a lot of this aid money went back to the United States and didn't really get on the ground. Someone once described it as a storm in the desert. It could rain, but after about an hour after it finishes, you can't see any water. You can't see any impact. I think in this case, what troubles me is in my conversations recently with people in government or who have been in government, is that the plan seems to be to take the programs that were run by USAID, Prosper Africa, Feed the Future, Power Africa, and put it into the State Department. But you see, long before I worked for...
Could you please get back into your frame, Gregory?
Oh, sorry. Long before I worked for USAID, I worked with USAID as a contractor. The problem is that you have a lot of experts in AID who know how, over the many, many years, how to operate these programs. State Department is a diplomatic organization. They don't have that expertise. So if you put these programs under the State Department, I'm afraid you're not going to have the kind of people who are necessary to efficiently and effectively operate these programs. Plus, My understanding from just a few days ago was that the plan is to cut back on people working on these programs. For example, the East Africa Trade and Investment Hub, which deals with several countries, is being told that they need to operate with one person. One person would be difficult to work on one country, much less several countries. So I think the whole concept of this is short sighted to a disastrous degree.
Johanna, talk about the approach to USAID. In recent years, there's been criticism, people comparing China's approach and Washington's approach, accusing Washington of increasingly weaponizing aid, telling countries, if you choose A, we will respond like C. If you choose B, we won't come through for you. How, I mean, one could conclude then that even before the announcement by President Donald Trump of the tearing down of USAID, American aid was not generating the same soft power that it used to.
No, I think there's we can agree to that to a certain extent. But furthermore, as I said earlier, aid has always been used again as a soft power, right? And when the United States is determining who to provide foreign assistance to, the first thing that comes in mind is the United States national and strategic interest, right? It has to be in the interest of the United States. That's the first thing. And if it undermines the interest of the United States government or the American people, it just will not be a priority,
Other
right?
countries have interest too.
We saw that, in places like Uganda, for example, which it was an AGOA beneficiary, which is a trade preference program. And because Uganda passed a legislation that the United States deemed to be anti-LGBTQI plus. As a result, under the Biden administration, Uganda was removed from AGOA, and this is just one example, but there are many others, right? When it comes to aid, there had always been some kind of condition attached to it, meaning that the country had to be perceived to be adhering to democratic norms, right? So I think that with the aid not being available anymore, and in the U.S. reconsidering, I think it's an opportunity for African countries to really focus more on trade and investments. I think it's a very good opportunity for initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area to be fully executed, for countries to trade amongst each other, right? And to ensure economic prosperity for the continent, because aid has not provided that prosperity for the people on the continent. It has provided, though, some kind of relief. And I think that we have to be honest when we talk about aid, right? While there have been some challenges in the execution of aid across the globe, but it has achieved some level of success. I mean, you look at the HIV and AIDS crisis in places like Eswatini and even South Africa, the role that USAID and United States aid under Jeff Bush, right, the PEPFAR program, was utilized in order to reduce the number of infections and to provide access to medicine to those who are in grave need. So again, I think that while there will be significant impact with the United States' new strategy towards foreign aid, but I think that it's also an opportunity for the continent to focus more on economic development, on trade and investments, because I think that's where you're going to see the real change, and it's going to increase the GDPs of countries across the continent. Like, for example, with the AFCFTA, the World Bank announced that if implemented properly, we're talking about increasing the collective GDPs of African nations by more than 3 trillion USD. So once countries have more money, right, and more resources, they can then be able to provide more resources for social programs across the continent.
Thank you, Johanna. Jeffrey, what about people who have built careers in the aid industry? Where does this leave them?
Thank you, Ronald. Yeah, so
Or
that's
should we say development work?
Yes. So thank you. So first off, I do agree mostly with what Michael, my fellow panelists have shared, that there needs to be change. But I would also just like to share that much of this lies on the governance of each of the individual countries, and we all know that that cannot happen overnight. And it therefore takes time. It needs this transition. Secondly, I think we are in a unique position, as highlighted. And so for folks who are in the development world, I believe this is a unique position for us in development world to really rethink the role of development work. I think that what is likely to happen is that much of the work being done is likely to morph. For example, I think that there are already organizations who are thinking of creative ways of still providing critical services while remaining afloat. For example, we know that access to basic healthcare is a challenge, and so how can organization, private sector work with government to create this micro health insurance cover for folks who cannot afford? And so what I foresee is that there is likely going to be a pivot in terms of how aid is delivered. All these folks are critical, and just to highlight that, if you imagine all the doctors, scientists, and all that human resource that have invested so much in health, education, development, the countries and the economy still need them, and so they are a vital part of these economies. And so I think it's just about matter of the transition.
Yeah, Professor Bokpin, an argument has been made that Africa, low-income developing countries do not exactly need aid. They just need fairer trade from their richer counterparts. Yeah, and I mean, should African leaders now be saying that now that you're withdrawing aid, give us fairer trade, plus let us exploit our natural resources, let us get our oil out of the ground, oil that the West has been refusing to fund because of climate change concerns? Should that be the demand that African leaders are making now?
Yes, I agree with you that Africa needed, as other panelists have indicated, that what we need is fair trade, investment. Yeah, but it's not going to be given on a silver platter. I think we have to negotiate from position of strength. And the only way we can do so is for Africa to unite and have a common strategy to engage the rest of the world. Sometimes what you see happening in Africa is that countries are in a hurry to negotiate and get ahead of each other and all of it. Let's have a common strategy to engage Europe. Let's have a common strategy to engage North America. Let's have a common strategy to engage China, the BRICS, and the rest of them. I think that's the way we have to look at it, because certainly, I mean, the best helping hand that Africa can find is not aid. It's at the end of our own arm. It's about we taking charge of our own destiny. And come to think about it, that after several decades of independence, the basic necessities, the essentials of life, right, is where Africa is failing. I mean, is that not concerning? I mean, we have some of the best cars on our streets. That's not a problem. we have we have our leaders live more affluent life than the Europeans. You are aware of that, than other countries where we borrow from. I think it's more about our mindset, and I think that we need to go back to the drawing board. That Africa can only make it when we are inclusive and we carry everybody along. But as you rightly said, I think that if you look at even Trump and the withdrawal, the supposedly withdrawal from the Paris climate agreement and all of that, I think Africa will have to manage the trade-off quite carefully. We are not at the same level where we can embrace climate change like other advanced countries and the rest of them and all of that. Even US is going back to oil and gas. Okay, they said they are going to drill like a baby, right? That's what Trump signaled. Again, if you look at the response, yeah, if you look at the response from the Arab countries, right, where they are depending heavily on oil and gas and the rest of them, each country, each continent is trying to develop based on its own circumstances and managing the trade-off very well. So I think that is what we need to do. And not, you see, growth cannot come substantially and inclusively from natural resources. We have to be able to use that to build human capacity, skills, and so that we'll be able to develop more from innovation and deployment of technology and all of that. So I think those are the areas that we have to look at. But I'm of the view that all that is happening probably is just an opportunity for us to see a greater future. What it also means is that the aid that for a long time has been used as a soft end, right, to manipulate the continent, essentially to get what they want and to get us to play along in the global geopolitics and all of that. Probably they may not have that leverage anymore, right? And therefore we should be able to. But there's a lot that Africa can gain actually by trading within the continent. Somebody mentioned the African Continental Free Trade. We need to learn to trade among ourselves because it's easier. The standard requirements are much easier to manage and all of that as compared to accessing European market and all of that. So I think that there's great opportunity moving forward.
Yeah, let me move swiftly to Gregory. Gregory, some have expressed optimism that USAID will return in some way, maybe not the way that we're used to, but will return in some way. How do you think that is going to look like? And what will it mean for developing countries?
Well, as I said earlier, the plan, as I understand it, is that it's going to be merged into the State Department. Again, I think that's a mistake because you lose a lot of people who have the technical experience to manage these programs efficiently and effectively. But I think that the problem is once you break the trust people have that aid is going to be consistent, that now they don't really feel that they can trust you. I think that AID probably will resurface. You can question the desire of government leaders in the United States to really help African people become self-sufficient. I know that was the main thrust of Ambassador Mark Green, who was the head of AID when I was there.
That was your slogan, but on the ground, there was no evidence of that.
Well, I think what they're finding out now is that there's a lot of these programs where the money is finding its way into places that have nothing to do with what the program was supposed to be for. Now, I think that, as I said, you can question whether the leaders really care about Africa, but there are many, many Americans who care about Africa, who care about all of the developing world. So I think at some point they're going to have to bring it back, whether they really want to or not, because the American people want that. They just
Thank you, Gregory. We're running out of time. Can I come to you, Johanna now. Aid is going away, and it should be replaced with trade. So goes the argument.
Yeah.
Do you think the US is capable of imagining something better than AGOA, which many say has run its course and is no longer fit for purpose? Briefly.
Yeah, you know, I was talking to some colleagues on the Hill the other day, and it appears to me that AGOA, as it stands right now, um, has an 80% chance of not proceeding, right? Of being reauthorized. As you know, it expires in September of this year. But I think it's an opportunity because, as we have seen with Mr. Trump, um, he uses trade as a negotiation tactic, right? And I think that we may see a shift from AGOA to a more one-on-one trade agreements with countries across the continent that have the capacity. So you're going to be looking at countries like Egypt, right? Certainly, Kenya, Nigeria. So the heavy players, right? The countries with the highest GDPs. One will say, then what happens to countries like Eswatini and Lesotho, which Mr. Trump mentioned last night during the congressional address, indicating that no one had ever heard of such country, right? So I think it's even more of an opportunity to focus on one, the AFCFTA, and two, for African countries to come together, right, through the African Union and have one or two proposals around trade that would not just benefit their respective countries, but obviously the United States as well, because we also see that the United States puts preference on domestic production, right? So I think that that has to be taken into consideration. And one of the reasons why companies will go abroad and create their goods in different countries is because of cheaper labor, right? But Mr. Trump is saying that he wants those companies to come back to America. And I think that's what the tariffs is going to do. The tariffs, if they stay in place, is going to force some of these companies to come back to the United States and produce and create some of the products. But what that also means is that it's still going to be a much more expensive for the American taxpayer, whichever way that you look at
Is
it.
there a chance Johanna will have the US Africa summit under Trump? Do you see that happen?
That is a good question. I'll leave it to the expert to make that determination. But based on the way things are going, we saw that Mr. Trump, Secretary Rubio, declined to attend the G20 summit in South Africa because he was not too pleased with U.S. South Africa relations at this moment because of various issues that we're probably not going to have time to get into right now. So we'll see. But I think that African governments should have a plan, a proposal on trade and investments for the continent as a whole. And I think that it will not serve in the best interest of the continent for countries to come to the United States individually when you're talking about trade, because the United States is looking for high scale, high level trade and investment opportunities.
Thank you, Johanna. Jeffrey, very quickly, for people like you in the charity sector, in people who are doing voluntary work, non-governmental work, is there a way to imagine aid that doesn't, that isn't predatory and does not perpetuate dependency? I think your microphone is.
Sorry. Yes. Yes. Just to add, is just that I think there are conversations around decolonizing aid, and that's been going on for the longest time. And we are preaching localization. And I would also just like to confirm that there's progress. You look at institutions such as African CDC that have made good progress. We've been able to handle and manage a lot of contagious diseases. So there is a lot of things happening around decolonizing aid and enabling localization. So that is a big part of what organizations such as CFK Africa are really driving.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for your thoughts. Thank you, Gregory Simpkins, an expert on US Africa relations and the editor of Habari Network. And to you, Professor Godfred Boppin, an economist joining us from Accra. And to you, Johanna LeBlanc, a national security law and US foreign relations expert. Thank you, gentlemen and lady, for your thoughts. And thank you too for watching from wherever you watched us from. My name is Ronald Kato. From me and the rest of the team, we'll see you on the next episode of the African News Debates.